We are also following some breaking news from the U.S. Supreme Court. Justices closed out their term today, issuing two major decisions before adjourning for the summer. They ruled along ideological lines on the new Arizona voting legislation and on charitable donations. NBC News Justice correspondent Pete Williams joins us from Washington now. Pete, let's start with Arizona. Can you break down the court's decision on this voting law?
Sure. The court upheld two provisions in Arizona. One that said if you cast your ballot accidentally in the wrong precinct, the state will throw it out. And secondly, that only you or your caregiver or somebody closely associated with you can collect your mail-in ballot, that you can't engage in what the state derisively called ballot harvesting. The Supreme Court upheld both those provisions, and that's not the surprise, because even the Biden administration said those two provisions probably would survive the test under what's left of the Voting Rights Act. But that gets us to the important part of the decision. This was the Supreme Court's first application of that part of the Voting Rights Act to voting restrictions. In the past, it's always been used to test redistricting, redrawing the lines for congressional or legislative boundaries. And what Justice Alito said for the majority today is that any time the state makes a change in the voting rules, it's going to impose some inconvenience on somebody. And as long as it's an equal burden, he said, it's going to pass muster under this law, even if it has some minor effects on different segments of the population. He said this: the mere fact that there is some disparity in impact doesn't necessarily mean that a system is not equally open or does not give everyone an equal opportunity to vote. And so he said, even if there is some, if you can show that it would affect, for example, blacks or Native Americans or Hispanics slightly more than others, the state can overcome that problem by saying it's necessary to prevent fraud, for example. So as long as the state can offer a justification, it can overcome these objections that there are what he called slight disparities. He also said, look at what the voting atmosphere was at the time Congress passed the Voting Rights Act in 1965. Almost nobody could vote by mail. Now there's much more voting by mail. So he said these attacks on restrictions in voting by mail, you really have to pass a steep test. The dissenters were equally strong in their dissent. Justice Kagan had a blistering dissent saying that this really cuts back on the promise of the Voting Rights Act. And she says the majority sort of assumes that the problem of discrimination in voting has gone away when that is not the fact. She said in some cases it's getting worse.
Yeah. Pete, I want to ask you quickly, too, about this second big decision that came from the court today about whether charities have to disclose the names of their donors. How did the court rule there?
Well, the court said the California law requiring that is unconstitutional. It violates the freedom of association. The court agreed with the charity groups that oppose this law, saying that sometimes this information becomes public and it makes people less likely to contribute. It exposes them to intimidation or ridicule. What the dissenters say in this case is their concern is that this ruling undercuts or begins to erode the justification for requiring disclosure of the names of people who contribute to political campaigns or who give money to efforts to get referendums on state ballots. That's their concern.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.